Hello, I'm Jacob and welcome back to my channel, and I'm still doing my Richard Laymon read-a-thon. Today I'm going to be talking about Richard Laymon's books Bite, and I am joined, of course, as always, until I can find a way to film back upstairs, by this awesome wood paneling wall behind me. It is original, it is awful, and it is probably going to stay for the foreseeable future as I have no control over it. Today we'll be talking about Richard Laymon's Bite, which I've already said. This book I'm on the fence about. I really liked parts of it. I did like it much better than The Traveling Vampire Show, and I liked it better than Endless Night. And I'm going to get into why. But first, I will read the back of it, because I think I should really start reading the back of these things at the beginning instead of halfway through the middle or whenever I remember to do it. And I'm going to try to get better at that for you guys' sake. It's almost midnight. Kat's on the bed, face down and naked. She's Sam's former girlfriend, the only woman he's ever loved. Sam's in the closet with a hammer in one hand and a wooden stake in the other. Together they wait as the clock ticks down because... the vampire is coming. When Kat first appeared at Sam's door, he couldn't believe his eyes. He hadn't seen her in 10 years, but he'd never forgotten her, not for a second. But before this night is through, Sam will enter a nightmare of blood and fear that he'll never be able to forget, no matter how hard he tries. A lot to unpack there. Basically, this is the story of a guy who never discovered Tinder and never got over his high school crush, whose life has completely fallen apart, and she shows up at his door, much like Jenny in Forrest Gump, trying to find anyone stupid enough to help bail her out of her issues. Her issue being right now that she's somehow brought a vampire into her life and needs it to be killed because it is constantly attacking her and sexually assaulting her because it, unshockingly, is an actual monster and sees her and other humans as its plaything. Now, while we should never condone any sort of violence of that kind against anyone, it should be pointed out that at the beginning of all this, Kat was very much game and okay with their encounters and thought the vampire thing was nifty. Though it's kind of told through a gray area in the book, at that point very much does get across. However, Sam does not seem to understand that. So it is kind of weird. Trigger warning, there is a lot of sexual assault in Kat's past, which gets talked about in this book. For some reason, she decides to... Well, hold on. I need to start somewhere because we need to not jump in the middle. I tend to jump around in these reviews, and I'm trying to get better at that. So I'm going to catch myself right then and there. I'm not great at editing, so I won't take this part out. So, let's get back to the beginning. This is what I really liked about this book. It has a great build-up, a really good preface, just like Endless Night. It really grabs you and pulls you into this world right off the bat. And I completely love how the vampire was shown here. The actual encounter between Sam, Kat, and the vampire is very thrilling. The vampire is exactly what you want a vampire to be. It is like Salem's Lot, or not so much 30 Days of Night, but very much Fright Night. It is the super strong Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition vampire. It can do things we don't understand, and unless you get it in the heart, it is a thing brought back from the dead that is unconceivable to the average mortal and can do whatever it wants. Like, beat them all up like ragdolls as they try to kill it. However, they are able to get a stake through its heart, which starts this thing that I thought was very interesting because it doesn't really get talked about, I don't think, a lot in not only horror books, but even urban fantasy books, which I do really love. Urban fantasy series like the October Days series, Dresden Files, those sorts of books, is the fact that once you kill a vampire, what do you actually do with its body? Because now you have this corpse that may or may not be missing a head or have a stake through it or have been set on fire that you have to dispose of. And depending on what sort of world building's been done, there is a very slim chance that you're going to be able to, that any character is going to be able to say, hey, no, it's cool. This is a vampire. I'm taking care of business. So it was really interesting to see that handled, and the way that the characters that did the killing are panicking about it. If you're like me and you're a fan that rewatches The Vampire Diaries or what's the first one before Legacies? The Originals, where they're literally dropping several bodies every episode and it doesn't really get explained how they dispose of them. They just always say, I took care of it. Well, this is an interesting take on how they're going to dispose of them. They live in, I do believe it was Los Angeles in this book. I think Richard Laymon resided in Los Angeles, and a lot of his books actually take place in Los Angeles or somewhere up and down the California coast. And yeah, it has to be Los Angeles because I think they said it was like a 4 or 5 hour drive from there to, or 8 hours, something like that. I don't know. But it's they decide to drive the body out into the desert, into Vegas. You can do that from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Isn't a super crazy drive as it would be if you were like me and you reside in Virginia and someone was like, hey, I'm going to go bury this vampire in Vegas. Do you want to come with me on a 48-hour car ride? And we're not going to stop because we have a body in the trunk. Whereas that was their plan. They were going to go drive this body out into the desert and bury it. And on this super thrilling car ride in which Sam has really come to Kat's aid here, she kind of regales him with these fun road trip stories of all the encounters of sexual assault she's ever been, she's ever had happen to her, and how terrible like her other boyfriends were and how they treated her and what random guys would do to her and all these like awful things, and reminding him why he's such a good friend. It was really weird. And of course, it wouldn't be a Richard Laymon book if it wouldn't be any horror book really if they got away scot-free, because the actual vampire murder and plan to bury it are in the very beginning of the book. So they are not the entire book, because of course they meet crazier people on the road. They end up coming up against some drifters and some serial killers. And I'm not going to spoil too much about that. It was kind of an interesting take, I guess. I like the... I don't know. At first I didn't like it. I didn't like this idea that it was a vampire book and now you've thrown this other trope in there. But the more I think about it, and once I finished the book, I think I had a greater appreciation for it. Because on the one hand, they have like a real monster in the trunk of their car they are trying to dispose of, but now they've run on to these very human monsters. And I think Kat and Sam both had some dialogue throughout there where they're like, well, this is kind of funny that we're able to defeat a vampire and now we're just going to die by regular sickos. Which I thought was interesting and was a weird dynamic of, hey, we've just killed something that's actually evil and you're doing bad things, but you're just playing at evil, which I did like the contrast of that, and I did find that interesting. So I do think this is a fun book. I do think I would recommend this book for people to read it if they want a good horror centric vampire book that's, bloody and gory, but at the same time with a twist, if that makes sense. It's not a very traditional vampire book. Obviously, there are like different tropes playing around there. I wouldn't recommend this book for anyone that's triggered by any sort of references to sexual assault, because like I said, the entire car ride out to the desert is really just Kat regaling Sam with all these past experiences in a way that really reminded me of Simon in Endless Night. The same thing he would do when, you know, in his chapters where he's driving around with his tape recorder and talking about these past crimes. It's with the same detail, only this time it's from the, you know, the point of view of the victim. But it was very strange. You know, and there is kind of like this happily ever after thing that happens in the book, but really, really kind of like, listen, I don't know how to put this like in a good light, but I really like the movie Forrest Gump. I don't think he should have taken Ginny back. Ginny was a very toxic human. I feel the same way about Kat. I think that both Sam and Kat had some problems. I think Sam would have been okay with after some therapy and maybe dating somebody and putting himself out there, or, you know, maybe signing up for some of those like single socials type things. But Kat like had some other like stuff going on. And her character building kind of alludes to that. Like, her character building doesn't really throw her in a good light. And I think that may have been why they tried to use all these like anecdotes of, you know, these past assaults, because then it kind of paints her more of a victim of circumstance. But you can still kind of be a victim of a bad thing and still not be a good person, if that makes sense. Like, so it kind of, that's how it read to me. Is I felt really bad that these things happened to this character, but I still didn't like the character. You know, it was like that's awful, but you're also treating other people awful and putting them in dangerous situations. So yeah, it was weird. It was, yeah, so that's one of the things I don't like about it. The main characters in their own way were kind of unlikable, which is sometimes a trope, I think, in Richard Laymon's books. Or at least he really tries to make characters be one thing. Kat was the pretty girl next door who, you know, it almost felt like at times he was kind of punishing her because Sam was the nice guy. But Sam has some very creepy tendencies, and I can completely understand, even though I didn't like Kat, why she never gave him the time of day. So it's a weird dynamic. So yeah, it's a weird, that whole relationship is a weird dynamic. Basically, Kat knew he wouldn't go anywhere, and she would always kind of have him if she threw a hook out every now and again, and that's why he got to help her kill a vampire. And Sam is the proverbial nice guy who thinks that he's basically entitled to time with Kat because he is nice to her and has always been there for her, not understanding how creepy that comes across. So in their own ways, they are kind of a match made in heaven, or at least in the desert of Nevada with a dead vampire in the trunk. So yes, I do recommend this book. I think a lot of people will have fun reading this book. It's still not my favorite Richard Laymon book. That is still going to Body Rides right now. And that might change, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But Body Rides, as of right now, is my favorite Richard Laymon book from this whole read-a-thon. I do have high hopes, like I said, for Island. I even have high hopes for Savage. I've heard really good things about Savage. I'm trying to track down a copy of Darkness Tells Us because I also love a good Ouija board story. So I'm really hoping that's going to pan out something. I just don't want to spend eBay money on a copy of Darkness Tells Us, especially because I'm kind of being trifling right now because I've seen it in the wild before, and I know that if I just hold out long enough, it'll pop up in Goodwill again. So as long as I can read it sometime between now and the end of the year, I'll be good. But yeah, I'm glad. It seems like a lot of you guys are enjoying these videos. But at the same time, there is a good chance I might run out of the actual books to read before I can track them down. But don't worry, I'm going to be reviewing other books. I've been reading a lot of books this year, a massive amount of books, which I will talk about in later videos. But if you like extreme horror like Brian Smith or Brian Keene, and even more like pulpy horror and science fiction like Armand Rosamilia, and just stuff really all over the horror, science fiction, and fantasy spectrum, well, you're in luck because I've been reading it. And I've even been reading a lot of like men's action and adventure. For instance, I read J.R. Lansdale's MIA Hunter pretty recently. If you haven't read that, it's much different than anything else I think he's ever written, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the types of books you like. I found it kind of enjoyable, and I'll talk about that in a later video. Although when I did say I was reading it, J.R. Lansdale did comment under my post on Twitter and apologize, which is never a good thing, I guess, when a author feels the need to apologize for their work. However, I did find the book pretty interesting, but that's a story for another time. So I do hope you check out those videos, which will be coming out in the future. And as always, if you liked this video, or you liked Bite, or you have a recommendation for another Richard Laymon book, or even if you hated this entire video and want to call me out for all the points I missed and want to tell me why Bite is a great book or a bad book or whatever, please let me know down in the comments. And as always, like and subscribe. I will see you guys next time.